So here's the thing, it's funny when we talk about heaven, like there's all of these like views around what heaven is, right? From the time that you're a kid, I think they were talking about this earlier, Dan was mentioning like all dogs go to heaven. Anybody see that show when you were growing up with the movie? There's all these sort of things, like you go like, heaven is one of these things that just exists in our culture. And if you've been a follower of Jesus, maybe you heard about heaven for the first time when you were a kid, maybe you're vacation Bible school, or maybe you were like, I don't know, in kids church, and you hear about heaven, you hear about hell, and there's like something that's next. And generally we get images of heaven that are so fascinating. We talked about this a little bit last week. There's like streets of gold. And you're telling like 6-year-olds that it's going to be great because there's streets of gold. And if you're a 6-year-old, you're like, I don't really care about that. You know, there's a little bit of those things. There's all these like visuals of pearly gates and somebody at the gates to decide if you get in. And there's all of these sorts of things around heaven. And it exists in our culture. We use the word heaven, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, in certain instances. It just sort of exists. Now, here's what's fascinating. Emily and I have these conversations all the time. I think this a lot. I think when it comes to heaven, if you're a person in the room who's a follower of Jesus, most people who are Christians say some version of like, I believe that it's out there and exists. And also, most of us, if we're really honest, go, I have no real idea about what it is. And so we know that maybe it's out there, but we keep it at a distance so that we don't have to deal with it at all. Right? Like there's just like, it exists and it's great and I'm really hoping that I'm right and I hope that whatever's next is good or maybe hopefully better than this, but it doesn't really like show up consistently in your life. It's not something that you think about all that often until you have somebody that you care about who maybe passes away, and then you care about it all at once, right? But then for most of us on a day in and day out basis, it's not something that we think about a ton. Now, what we do this summer, I was gonna tell you, we go on like a trip every summer, and I was thinking about this as it pertains to heaven. My kids, I'm gonna show you the obligatory, like here's my kids picture. These are my kids, we're Braves fans, because we're Christians, and just kidding. Reds fans. There's a little bit of this where I go like, we were going on vacation. If you ever go on a vacation with multiple kids, you know this, like the first part of the vacation is generally good. And then the last 6 hours of the vacation, you're wondering why you had them. There's a little bit of that. And we were in the car and we were going and we got to where we were going. It all went great. But on the way back was actually the hardest part of the trip. And so we make it back. And as we're driving back, I was very tired, right? So you're like, if you're in the car with your kids, you're very tired. I was feeling this, like I was ready to be home. And I was ready to be home and just like driven by the idea that I'm gonna get there, I'm gonna make it home, it's gonna be good. And my kids are excited, we are close, they were asleep. And so we were getting close, it was calm in the minivan. And then all of a sudden, we have Waze that we were using to follow back home. Anybody use Waze? You know what I'm talking about, Waze? Yeah. Real quick, let's just go ahead and divide the room. How many of you are Waze people? Where are my Waze? Where are the Google Maps? Yeah, and then who uses Apple Maps so we can judge you? No, I'm just kidding. It works now though, which is great. So we're doing this sort of thing and we're driving back, and Waze told us, I don't know if you ever had that, Waze told us to go like make a turn that we thought would be longer, and we didn't trust Waze. And by we, I mean me. And so we're sitting there, and so what we did is we adjusted course, and we like said, I'm gonna do it anyway, the way that we knew how. And as soon as we did the next exit, we literally got to a standstill in traffic, right? And we're sitting in standstill because Waze knows more than all of us. And we're sitting there for 2 hours in the car. And of course the kids woke up. And I thought to myself, I was like, I had all of these emotions around one thing. And the one thing that I had all of these emotions around was like, we have a destination that we have to get to. And that destination is my bed. You know, like I am ready to get home. I am ready to stop. I am driven by that. And everything around me and my emotions and my thoughts weren't just driven by the moment. They were driven by where I was going. It was driven by where I was headed. And this is what's so fascinating is when you read the scriptures, when you read the text, when you read the Old and New Testament, when you look at the writers and the people who experienced God in these ways, they're not just driven by the moment, which sounds a little bit weird and counterintuitive to what our culture often teaches. They're driven by something that is to come, and also something that is both already in existence and has access to and present. And what we see throughout the scriptures, this is what's so fascinating, is they're driven by this idea of heaven. They're driven by this new kingdom that exists in the world and that is to come in the world. They're driven by this sort of thing that is beyond them. Now, when it comes to this, and this is just at least my perspective, and this is what I feel a lot of times, is when I talk to people who are followers of Jesus, you know this, we are very wrapped up oftentimes in the here and the now and what we're feeling and the distractions that we have here. But it is hard for us to focus further out and be driven by what's to come. And you know this too. The reason that that's true is because you got a lot going on. I mean, you got a lot to be distracted by. You got a lot that you are carrying. Some of you are just, if you're really honest, you're just tired. Sometimes you're tired, you don't even know why. You're just a little bit exhausted. Your attention is pulled in 1,000 different directions. There's so many things to think about. There's so many things that you have to do. And all of a sudden, for someone to talk about Christianity and go, hey, what should be driving you and pulling you in a direction is the new kingdom that is to come, or the heaven sort of thing that we're talking about. Like that feels good in church. And also 11 minutes after you leave, it doesn't feel relevant because it's out there and you don't really know or feel what it is. But this is one of the things that's so fascinating about the New Testament, the people that wrote the New Testament, is they were driven by both what is and what is to come. I put it in my notes to say it this way. Like, it is easier to focus on what is in front of me than be driven by what is ahead of me. And in our culture and with Christianity, for many of us as it exists today, and for most of us with the lives that we live today, that is a very true statement of most of us. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to take just a few verses and we're going to look at one of the things that a guy named Paul sort of talks about when it comes to having an eternal perspective, right? Well, what it looks like to live our lives, not just for the here and now, but also for what is to come and be driven and pulled by that thing. And he's writing to a group of people in an area of the world that is so fascinating. He's talking about what it looks like to live as a person who's a follower of the way or a follower of Christ. And as he talks about these sorts of things, what he's going to say and what he's going to teach out on is this is what it looks like, not just to live well now, but to be pulled in a direction by something that's going to change the fullness of your life, right? So here's what he says. He's going to be in chapter 3, verse 1. Here's what it says. It says, so since then you have been raised with Christ, and then he says this, to set your heart on things above where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Now, it's one of these weird things, especially for us guys, the set your heart on things above. You don't set your heart on anything. Most of us don't think of it that way. But in the original Greek language that this is talking about, the idea of setting your heart on something is actually setting so much of the fullness of you on something, that you are going to be looking not just at your life through one perspective, but the fullness of what Jesus is and who he is and through his perspective that he gives us. This is an identity question, right? So he's going like, since then you have been raised with Christ, set your hearts on things above, meaning this, that your identity is not just existent in this here and now world. It is actually, and this is a foundational belief of Christianity, that this is not all there is more to come, and what is to come is both accessible now and in the future. That God is pulling us into this belief of what is and believing that he is making all things new and at the same time allowing us to usher in this new kingdom in the world now. So when Paul talks about this, he talks about it very clearly, going like, this is what you set your hearts on. The fullness of your heart and your being, setting on things that are above and beyond you. Then he goes on and he says this. He says a slightly different way. He says, so then you set your minds on things above, not on earthly things, which is one of those things that is really great to say and also one of the things that's very difficult to do. Paul would write about this again in Romans. He would write about this in several different parts of the New Testament where you see that he's going, you're going to set your mind or change your mind in the fullness of your perspective on not just the earthly here and now, but what is to come and where you are headed. You are going to be driven by that, which is going to be changing your thought patterns and your mind around those things. That you're going to monitor the consistent posture and presence of your heart to think about where you are going, not what just is. Now, can I say this to you really, really honestly? Especially talking about this on like a back to school week for those of you who have kids, talking to this in a busy season of life. It does sound good if you're a follower of Jesus, and also it doesn't sound urgent. There's a part of this going like, if I'm gonna set my mind on things above or the things that really matter, that sounds good, and also it feels distant. Because you're trying to figure out how to do lunch boxes. Some of you are trying to figure out how to go back to school. Some of you are trying to figure out what it looks like in dating, where you got all of these urgent things here and now. And Paul is going, but if you are only driven by that, you're going to miss being driven by what is to come. So like monitor the posture and the patterns of your heart. And the second thing around this that I would say is this. It also adjusts the abundance versus scarcity mentality for many of us. The idea of eternity is one of those things that feels great in terms of a symbol or a math problem. And also most of us have no comprehension of what that means or what that looks like. The idea of eternity is one of the things that sounds really great. And also, you don't know what it's like to be 6,522 years old, right? You just don't feel that. What does it look like to exist for that kind of time? And when Paul is talking about heaven, part of the reason that we don't think about it is it just feels too big, kind of like space. Like we stop at Pluto, you know? Like there's a little bit of this where it's like which is a planet for my psych fans in the room. Like there is a part of this where you go, yeah, like some of it just feels too big. And what Paul teaches on is going, no, you're going to set the pattern and the posture of your heart towards beyond you now. And go from there. And then he says this, and this is where we'll spend the last part of our time. He says this. He says, for those of you who are followers of the way, he's talking to you, for you died and your life is now hidden with Christ, meaning that you have experienced what it is to be certain of your future and where you are headed. That you have the comfort and the knowledge of knowing what is to come and where you are going. You've been hidden with Christ in God. So when Christ, who is in your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory, which is this security and this promise of the shared glory in Christ, meaning like whatever is next, as a follower of Jesus, you are in that thing. And can I just be really blunt with you? Is that all right? Really honest? I can bring my stool. I'm going to sit down because I want to. Yeah. Here's the thing about this that's so fascinating to me. And this is the part about the heaven thing that if we're going to be really blunt with you, makes it something that we don't talk about or think about too often, is I would say this. When it comes to your life and the fullness of your life and what you're thinking about when it comes to making decisions, you and I, for those of us who are followers of Jesus, find it very difficult to think through whatever's next. And maybe you get like bad health news and you think about it. And you're like, I really hope there's something next. But if you're really honest, you're going, I don't know what it is. And the clinging to the promise and the hope of what is to come is great. But at the same time, many of you feel invincible. I do too. Don't think about that. But this isn't just about hoping that we like get out of hell free sort of thing. And this isn't just about hoping that things go well when all of it's over. The earliest followers of Jesus and the people that Paul is writing to, many of them would go through the kind of persecution in their lives that most of us will never even see or experience. And what he's teaching on is going, there's something that centers you so deeply in the here and now where you don't have a scarcity mindset of going, well, I've got 70, 80, 90-ish years, whatever that is. That there's an abundance to your life and there's something that matters in your life that is beyond that time period. Which means when you feel fear, it's not a question of, is this a good or bad thing that might hurt me? It's actually a bigger question of who actually holds my future and where have I placed my trust? And when you feel anxiety around the things that you feel like you can't control, it's actually not just a question of like, how do I fix this thing? It's actually like, whose hands have I trusted my life to? And this isn't just a 70-year problem or an 80 or 90-year problem. This is an eternity sort of thing. When you think about the resources that you've been given and the life and the time that you've been given when it comes to your life, you're not just worried about the 60, 70, 80, 90 years that you've been given. No. You go, this isn't all there is. There is more to this thing than the finite nature of it. You don't have a scarcity mentality. You recognize the abundance and the eternal nature of you as a person. And this is where Christianity is a little bit different. Where it goes like, it's not up to you to be a good enough person because you can't just be a good enough person. And it's not up to you just to figure it all out because you can't just figure it all out. It's not up to you to do all of those things. The beauty of Christianity, in my view, is that Jesus did for you what you could never do on your own. And then he did for us something that allows us to experience the power of heaven in our lives as we lean into his redemption both now and have confidence in it when we move forward. And so I'll tell you, the next few things that I'm gonna put on the screen, I'll say this. If you're here and you're not a follower of Jesus, these are things that we long for as human beings, and also things that Christianity would teach that you can experience to a degree but never fully without Jesus. And so I put in my notes, we're gonna put these up here. When it comes to the things that you do around this truth, let's put this up here. One of the things that I put in my notes is this. We're taught that we should begin with the end in mind, but Christianity doesn't ever teach that. Christianity doesn't teach that you begin with the end of your life in mind. It teaches more this way, that you would go, you begin with eternity in mind. Now, I'm a big Stephen Covey fan. It's like my second favorite book to the Bible. Like, I'm all about some 7 habits. And also, this is not all there is. That you're beginning with eternity in mind, and it's actually, notice this, it actually stretches your mindset into an abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset. That you don't lose the urgency of that because what matters so much to you is what you're gonna do in this life and how it affects this life and what's to come. Beginning with eternity in mind. Then I put it in my notes instead of this way, and I'm pretty sure I stole this from a pastor named Joel Thomas. He's phenomenal. He has a incredible teachings around this. Joel said it this way, I love it. He says, we live towards what we look forward to in life. This is true in almost every area of your life. This is why you do premarital counseling. This is why you're doing the financial things that you're doing. This is why you do this with school. You live this way in so many other areas, but when it comes to faith, there's a piece of us as followers of Jesus that we're going to put on display in front of us, not just what is, but where we are going, and we live towards that thing in a practical way. And so here's kind of the application around what it looks like to follow this sort of teaching and this way as followers of Jesus. The first thing I said is this, that we work to live with an eternal perspective, right? If you're a person who's a follower of Jesus and would say that you're a Christian, you don't get to just go, I'm gonna live with a temporal perspective. You are living with an eternal perspective. You are living with a beyond me, beyond these years kind of perspective. So I put it in my notes, I said it this way. An eternal perspective will reorient your present values, your goals, and your mindset. When you are a follower of Jesus and you say, I'm going to follow that, I'm going to follow the teachings of Christ, it reorients your entire life towards where you're going with both an abundance mindset, not the scarcity, but also your values as this is not all that there is. I put in my notes, I said it this way. I was like, where does your mind, your body, and your spirit feel scarcity rather than abundance? Now, I actually want you to think about this for a second. Just for a second, when was the last time that you felt fear around scarcity, right? Some of you feel this when it comes to finances. Some of you feel this when it comes to the time that you have left. Some of you feel this with the time you have left with your kids in the house. Some of you feel this in so many different ways. Where do you feel like the scarcity thing versus abundance? That mindset is not an eternal mindset. The second one is this. People who follow this would go that they invest in what matters forever, not just what matters right now. I put in my notes, I said this, followers of Jesus invest their focus, their talents, and their finances towards what matters most. The question is is that something that we do? Like when you think about those things, when it comes to your focus and your talents and your finances, have you focused those things with an eternal perspective, or has it been limited towards what you see? The question around this is this: what do you sacrifice, or where do you sacrifice for things that will outlive you? Every follower of Jesus should have a very clear answer to what that means. When it comes to specifically those three areas, where for you as a person who's a Christian would go hey, these are where, right? These are the areas that I would say I am focusing on living beyond me with an open hand. And then the last one, I'll be honest, this is one of those things where some of you grew up in church and you heard somebody teach about what I'm about to teach about, and it felt judgy and a lot like this, right? Anybody ever been in one of those moments where somebody did this to you and you just felt like you can picture their face, right? You can feel this. And so it's funny, a lot of people don't teach on this kind of thing anymore, but Paul's follow-up to what he teaches about eternity is followed up with what it means to live with holiness and purity, right? I put in my notes, I said this, that as people who are followers of Jesus, the other part of our lives would say that we are bringing heaven to earth through your life. That the way that you live and interact with people matters so deeply. Having an eternal perspective means that the teachings of Jesus are so embodied in you that it changes the way that you actually live in the world. Put in my notes, I said this: purity is a pathway to influence and a life of significance for those people who are followers of Jesus. And the reason that purity matters so much is it shapes your heart and your capacity and your ability to view the world the way that Jesus has called you to view it and to live that way in the world. This is what Paul says in verse 5. He says it this way. He says, put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature. And can I just say this real quick? For those of you who are not followers of Jesus, I would say you're a little bit off the hook on this. This is, for people who are followers of Jesus, you don't get to choose. But if you are a person who's a follower of Jesus, the areas of your life that do not line up with the teachings of Jesus will lead you to a place of regret, but it's not just about your own personal regret. This is how I was brought up. I was brought up to go, it's gonna hurt you. And I actually think that's true. It does do something to you. But even more importantly, and you know that you have seen how it affects the people that are in your circle and disrupts the peace and the mindset of people who are around you as well. And what Paul teaches on is he's going, no, you don't just have some of it. You put to death those things that linger in your heart when it comes to sin. And you do it out of an eternal perspective of the impact that you're gonna make in the world. Put in my notes is this: where do you need to put to death? All right. Where do you need to put to death? And what do you need to nurture back to life in your life? I was thinking about this week. I'm really curious. How many of you are not fans of spiders in your house? Anybody? Do we like real not fans of spiders? Like not a little bit, but like really don't like spiders. Anybody else? We live like by some woods, so there's like a spider. This is the biggest spider I think I've ever seen in real life. This is going to be really bad. It's about this big. Now you're judging me for how big it is, but it sits outside of our window, and for a week and a half we've been watching this thing, deciding who's going to kill it, and it's not going to be me. And here's my man card. Like it's just not going to be me. So we watch this thing and we play with it from beyond the glass. We mess with it. And then the other night we're at our house, and then on the wall, we're playing with the spider. We turn around, there's like another spider on the wall in our house, and it's like this big, right? And so we all stood there and stared at the spider, and I'll tell you what, we were not gonna mess with it. I don't know if they're deadly, but in my mind, they absolutely are. And so Emily looks at me with that face of like, it's time for you to man up. You ever seen that face in Maris? You ever seen this? Just me? Okay, great. And so we did, and I looked at this thing, and so I went and I got a baseball bat. No, I'm kidding. I didn't do that. But I got a shoe. All right, I got a shoe. And he's a crafty little thing. And so I hit it, and then he fell to the ground. Now, he's on the ground. If you're a big animal lover, I'm so sorry, but it's a spider. I don't care about the spider. So the spider's like on the ground, like twitching, and I'm like, I should finish this off. And Emily's like, just pick it up with a paper towel and just kill it. And I looked at her, I was like, you're a psychopath. You know what I mean? Like, why would you ever do that? And so I looked at this thing, and I went back, and I was like, I'm not gonna let this thing linger alive while I take a paper towel to it. So I went back, I got the broom. We had a Braveheart moment. We did that. And then I went back and got another shoe, and I beat it until it's just like, it's no longer with us. It's just not there. And I killed it. You know what I mean? I did it. And then I went back and I crumbled this thing up. I was like, not only is it no longer with us, it is no longer with us. And I put that thing down. I was like, it's done. Now, it's cheesy, I know this, but I'm like, that's the viewpoint of putting it to death. Like some of you are like, I don't do that anymore, but I kind of like flirt with it a little bit. It's like around. That's not putting it to death. When it comes to your sin, it's not like, but sometimes, no, that's not putting it to death. Like, I know this sounds really blunt, I know this, but like I kind of struggle with this thing, but I kind of don't. That's not putting it to death. When Paul talks about this, the original Greek word of this is violent. It is aggressive. It is like you're done with it. You put it to death. And I'll just tell you this, for people who are followers of Jesus, who live with an eternal perspective, who care about their impact both now and what's next, come on, you know this. You don't court or have around in your life things that could diminish your influence now. And you don't court or have around things in your life that allow you to slip up and you put it to death, right? Now, I'll just say it really bluntly, and I'll just say this. For those of you who are dads in the room, I love talking to dads about this. I just go, and I've said this before, I would say, you don't court things in private that you really hope your kids don't find out about one day. You put it to death. Right? You don't allow things in your heart to grow that you know are sin because you put it to death. And can I just tell you something? This is one of the harshest, people, this is what feels judgy about it. The thing that feels judgy about it is no one wants to be told what to do when it comes to this, including me above anybody else. And also, for those people who are followers of Jesus, when people who are not followers of Jesus look at you, and this is really blunt, and go, but they kind of look exactly the same, but just a smidge different. Like they believe things are different, but their life looks exactly the same. I'm just gonna tell you this. You don't have any influence in those spaces. You just don't. You don't. If you're courting sin privately or publicly or just at all, it is affecting your heart. People who are followers of Jesus aggressively put to death the sin that is in your life. And here's what's amazing about what Paul writes, what Jesus taught about, what the New Testament teaches around this, is that it's not out of your control. That you have been given the power through the Holy and Sacred Spirit of God to experience what it looks like to have freedom in those spaces. And it doesn't mean that you don't need help doing it. Most of us need some version of counseling to do some of this. Most of us need to do heart work and soul work about these sorts of things, absolutely. And also, you have been given the power to put to death the things that will break your life. And having an eternal perspective, it transforms your view of pleasure. It transforms your view of influence. It transforms your view of the things that you feel like you need because you come open-handedly to God with all of those things. So put in my notes, said it this way again. This is Joel's quote, I believe. It says, we live towards what we look forward to in life. Now, we're gonna wrap up in just a second, but I want to show you this illustration that I thought was so fascinating. I came across it recently. It's a really beautiful and powerful story. I'm going to show you this picture. Do we have any swimmers in the room? Like you swam in like high school or college? Anybody do this, that sort of thing? Yeah, swimmers is like a real sport. Yeah, you do. Yeah. This is fascinating. So there's this picture. This is Florence Chadwick, and I love this. She was the first woman to swim the English Channel, but she swam it both ways, which I think is fascinating. Now, if you don't have context for this, this is not like a little bit of a pool. Like this is a legit swim, right? Like this is like a whole big thing. And she has this beautiful story about how in 1952, she was attempting to swim from the Catalina Island to the California coast. Now, she had done these extraordinarily long swims. She had done all of these sorts of things. She'd been doing this for years, and she's about to swim a very long distance. Now, 15 hours into what she's been working on, I want you to picture this, 15 hours into this swim that she's been a part of, she's been swimming for a long time, and as she's swimming, if you can picture this, she's out there doing this, and all of a sudden a thick fog sort of comes around where she's at. Now, you're not gonna pay me to swim in the ocean like this. This is not gonna happen. But if you can picture being out there and you're looking to where you're going and you're swimming, and all of a sudden a thick fog comes in and you can't see forward, right? There's a piece of this that she began to be disoriented about how much further she had. And so during this time, she found herself more exhausted. In an interview, she said later, I found myself more exhausted. I didn't think that I had what it took to get the rest of the distance. And so she sort of puts up her hands. She gets help. She says, hey, I need to be done. She pulls the plug on the swim. Now, what's fascinating about this is when they did that, they got her out of the water and realized that she was less than a mile away from the coast at the point that she threw up her hands, which for her was not that much further to go. And the only thing that changed wasn't physically her body. And the things that changed weren't really her ability to get the last mile. When we just swimming that long, she could have finished it out. Those weren't the things that shifted. It was that there was a lack of clarity around how much further she had to go or what was in front of her or the destination that she was headed to. The lack of clarity shifted everything for her. And I love this. This is the quote she had the next day at a press conference. She said this. She said, if I could have seen the shore, then I would have made it. And I love that. If I could have seen the shore, then I would have made it. And the beauty around that is when you have clarity about the place that you're going and the destination that you're headed to, there is something that literally, and you've experienced this before, it pulls you or it draws you to itself. This is what followers of Jesus look for in what is next. You are driven by eternity. It allows you to be more present in the moment, but you are driven by eternity. You are not moving left or right based off all the circumstances that you can or cannot control in your life. You find a deep centeredness when you are driven by eternity. And many of you have met people, and maybe they're older than you, who feel like they have that thing and it is like centered in them. My Uncle Mac used to have this. It was like, he's the guy who had the old Bible with the duct tape on the back of it. He was so deeply centered. And the thing that was deeply centering to him wasn't just all the truth that he knew. It wasn't all those things. It was that he was driven by what was to come. And it allowed him to experience this deep power in the present. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask you if you would, just close your eyes for a second, bow your heads. I'm going to ask you just for a second to reflect on this. And if you're here and you're not a follower of Jesus, just for a second, what I'm going to ask you to do is you're going like, hey, I don't know about the whole heaven thing. And when it comes to like the principles of applying this is what it means to follow Jesus. You're not sure about the Jesus part of it yet. And I'd say like, that's a great place to be. This is like, I'm really glad that you're here and you're processing those things. Our hope for you is that you would go, hey, if this matters so much, I'm going to lean into those questions deeply, right? And so what I'm going to ask you to do just for a second is if you're not a follower of Jesus, I'd go like, hey, what are the actual questions that you have or the pushbacks naturally that you have to both Jesus, Christianity, the things that you've been processing when it comes to your faith. But if you're here and you are a follower of Jesus, what I'm going to ask you is, when was the last time that you paused long enough or took an extended amount of time to ask yourself, what do I believe about what's next? And how does it apply to my life now? Like, when's the last time that you actually thought about heaven or whatever was next? And then the things that we talked about when it comes to like an eternal perspective or living with purity or being open-handed with your life, when you think about those things, which of those do you struggle the most with? Like, is it actually having an open-handed perspective with everything that you've been given because you're not afraid? For those of you, when it comes to eternal perspective, how much of you focus on like right now, and that's the only thing that you can seem to see? Maybe that's yours. And so what we're going to do, just for a second, is I'm going to pray for us in a minute. And this week, my hope for you is that you go, hey, there's like a running room to what we're going to talk about next week. And the running room is, if all of this is true, what is it that we actually have set our sights on when it comes to heaven, and what is it? And we're going to talk about that next week. But this week, I want you to live in the tension of, why do you not feel that or think about it now? And what questions do you have leading into understanding what heaven actually is? Let me pray for us. Father, we thank you that you love us enough to both be present in the here and now and draw us into what's coming. God, that you invite us into a redemptive story that is about bringing heaven to our world now and simultaneously having a hope and being rested in knowing that there is more to come. Father, I pray that you would help us to live the kind of countercultural life that causes us to be so open-handed with our lives, that we're just not afraid, that we just find a deep centeredness and an abundance of knowing that there is more than the present moment that you are drawing us into. God, we love you and you thank you for where you're taking us. God, for the person in the room who's like processing through faith and all those things, God, I pray that you'd speak clearly to them and help them to like really dive into the questions that they actually have about you, Christianity. And God, next week, I pray that you would just help us to have clarity about what it looks like and what is next, and actually dive into the questions about what is to come. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.